This is On Target St. John's. A look at politics, crime, education. What's happening here with the people who know. The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station. Now, your On Target St. John's host, Linda Swain.
Claudette Barnes, your guest host for On Target St. John's, filling in for Linda Swain on a much briefer version. Thanks to the various news conferences, we like to keep you up to date in the moment here on Vigo CM regarding COVID-19. And with that in mind, we also have to think about our mental health in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. And a couple of words that you're really going to be hearing a lot of will be social distancing and self-isolation. And both are encouraged by health officials to flatten the curve of the spread, but there are undoubtedly ramifications if it isn't done right. So there are ways to mitigate the negative effects of both self-isolation and social distancing. And I'm joined by local psychologist Dr. Janine Hubbard. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What an afternoon it is with news, hey?
This seems to be the new normal for us, at least since about this time last week, that things are rapidly changing, and what you know one day may very well be a different story the next. And so just trying to keep on top of things and keep up with them.
You bet. And of course, the latest is the unveiling of the $82 billion package in measures to help address the economic impacts, because there are so many reasons why people are stressing about COVID-19. But first, I want to get into how it affects you as a psychologist. Or I guess you're going to have to kind of change the way you do things.
Well, indeed, we are kind of scrambling as an association and as a profession across the country, trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our patients and clients, because while, some services are able to sort of shut down, this is a time when the needs of many of our clients are ramping up. So we're getting creative. We're coming up with whether it's increased sanitization and some real kind of distance in-person things, whether it's by phone, whether it's online. We're coming up with ways to make sure that in this period of high stress, people are feeling supported.
Can we talk a little bit about the fears due to COVID-19? We all know that many of us are feeling a lot of anxiety for so many different reasons. I mentioned earlier on about the social distancing. You can't even sit down and socialize with people at a local coffee shop. Most places are just doing takeout or drive-through. How does it impact our mental health?
Well, there's no question that this has caused heightened anxiety for pretty much everybody. And the first thing I want to remind everyone of is the good news is we're at a stage where we're being proactive and preventative as opposed to being reactive. And the more you remind that this is a cautionary thing we're doing in order to prevent further difficulty and to prevent, this happening for any longer than it needs to, we are in control. At the same time, absolutely, the more things we keep hearing and the more drastic life changes that are being imposed on us, we are at increased risk of stress. Not only have we changed some of these social issues, even things like people who routinely would work out at the gym or their forms of exercise, that has changed. We've got families who are home coping with kids, or we've got two parents working from home who aren't used to being around each other 24 hours a day. We're looking at some real societal shifts, and that's going to take some adjustment and some conscious, active planning and stress reduction techniques.
And of course, it really depends on the type of person you are, how you deal with anxiety. Can you get into a little bit more about who are more susceptible to the negative effects of social distancing? For instance, seniors would come to mind, loneliness, for instance, because long-term health facilities are restricting visitors.
They are. Anyone who has high social needs, so seniors are certainly a group that we're really concerned about. And while it's great that many of us are making use of technology to help stay connected, that's something that some seniors may be comfortable with, some may not. I taught my mother how to use FaceTime this morning for the first time ever, and we may need to be doing a few more of these kind of things in order to assist the seniors in our life, because they are feeling more isolated. So whether it's actually picking up the phone and having longer phone calls, whether it's doing some letter writing, like good old-fashioned letter writing, there are ways that we're going to try our best to support the community. people who are used to being very social in a busy office environment and are suddenly trying to work from home, that's a big adjustment. Our kids being home is a big adjustment. And then anyone with underlying anxiety disorders, particularly some of the forms of OCD, this is a really trying time.
Can we get a little bit into, you mentioned children, and because we're living at an age now where children are more connected to technology, but then there's this long school of thought that it has a detrimental effect on our children's mental health if they spend too much time on technology.
Well, here's the thing where I'm finally going to be popular with some of the kids and teenagers, because normally I'm the one harping, setting all kinds of limits around electronics. We still need to set limits around electronics. I firmly believe as much as possible to give a routine and some structure to life at home. Now, that doesn't mean you have school programming planned for every hour of the day. Some academic activities, and that can be reading novels together. It doesn't have to be core curriculum. Sometimes set aside for chores. Sometimes set aside for some physical activity, sometimes set aside for working on developing a new hobby or an interest, because this is where we're going to see alternate forms of learning. It could be learning how to cook. It could be picking up an instrument that's been collecting dust. It could be on your walk. Let's take photos of some of the trees we see or some of the footprints we see in the snow and go home and research them. There's lots of ways that we can continue education that might not be curriculum-based. And then knowing that especially some of the online gaming in our older kids and teenagers is a primary form of socialization, we're going to cut them a little bit of slack and make sure that they're enjoying some more time as a form of socialization.
And I guess learning, as you mentioned, is important, and routine is paramount. What about kids who are probably in the mode right now thinking, I'm on an extended vacation?
Well, and this is what happened to those of us who in the province who experienced Snowmageddon, and I was as guilty of this as everybody. First couple of days, it was like, great, this is excellent. You know, I get to have an afternoon nap, I can veg out and watch some TV, I did a little bit of cooking. Whereas if at the beginning of that week you told me you're going to be home for a week, I would have picked some projects, and I would have felt a sense of accomplishment by the end of that week. We know that this is going to be a lengthy process. We don't know how long, and that uncertainty can cause a lot of stress for many, many people. So pick an achievable goal for each day and each week, because we know that without some kind of structure, some kind of goal orientation, that's what can lead to a lot of distress. That's what can lead to cabin fever. For adults, that's what can lead to increased I don't know, are we going to call it COVID chips? And increased drinking, poor eating habits, the lack of exercise, all of these things that are fine and manageable when, you know, we have a snowstorm weekend, but are not going to be good for all of us long term as this extends.
I want to get into another sector of the population who may have heightened anxiety as well. And those are the folks who have to self-isolate. They're just getting home from vacation, or perhaps they are experiencing some symptoms of the virus. Can you talk about their concerns? Because self-isolation, you can't even really connect with those in your home a lot.
No, and this is going to be a very challenging time for a lot of people. The first thing I can say is if you are kind of in self-isolation, monitor your physical symptoms, but be really careful not to obsess over them. It is so easy. I mean, we're all doing it to a certain extent. Oh, my throat hurts. Uh-oh. If you know that you are being monitored for this, it would become very, very easy to really kind of lose big picture focus and focus on every little physical symptom. Listen, we all occasionally have a bit of a sore throat in the morning. We all sneeze. We all cough due to, you know, you're cleaning and you've kicked up some dust. No, but it's really easy to hyper-focus on those physical symptoms. And again, that can cause so much stress. So to a certain extent, embrace it as okay, you know what? I am stuck in here. What am I going to do that will let me feel productive at the end of the day, plus balance off some fun and some relaxation? So again, pick a project. Maybe if you're kind of self-isolated to the bedroom, it's time to gut that closet, or it's time to go through some of those drawers. Finding things to keep you active and mentally engaged is one of the best ways to get through things.
Now, you mentioned children a few times. I want to get into, for just a moment, all the news exposure. Kids are just feeding off of it with social media. Sometimes I feel that some of the children in my life, they're telling me more than what I've known about COVID-19. How can we put their fears to rest? It must be overwhelming for them.
It can be, and that's why for kids and for ourselves, this is a really important time to monitor how much media exposure you're having, sorry, Claudette, and how much social media exposure you're having. And what your kids are seeking out online. Because first of all, we know that there is a huge amount of misinformation out there. And so you want to make sure that help your kids, work with them and say, okay, here are the reliable resources that we're going to look to for information. We're going to go to the Government of Canada website. We're going to go to the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador website. We'll go to the World Health Organization website. And maybe locally there are a few places where we feel that they're providing really reputable information updates. That's where we will go to our sources and help teach them and model them that piece of the behavior. In terms of news exposure, my recommendation is check in on the news in the morning. Check in the news maybe sometime later in the day, especially if you know that there have been some, news announcements being made. And then the rest of the day, actively try to limit your exposure if you can. Because if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're someone for whom information seeking is helping to reduce your anxiety, great, go for it. But in particular, limit some of your social media exposure because you don't know. You might think that you're looking at some, cute cat videos, and then all of a sudden you're being hit with COVID stories, and it just starts to ramp up the anxiety, and it helps to lose a little bit of the perspective of, what am I doing today?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a fine dance between trying to be informed so you know how to act during this time of uncertainty, and, not just being overwhelmed with the information.
And I think you're going to find that there are that's going to be variable from day to day. So it's really kind of being mindful of your own stress levels and your own mental health. I've been noticing it because I manage the social media account for APNL, the Provincial Psych Association, where I've been posting a ton of materials. And even today, I sort of said, I need to step back and take a little bit of a break from this because this is starting to overwhelm me. Now, that being said, I'll probably be fine and go at it again tomorrow and be best kind, but it's monitoring your symptoms and saying, when is it time to take a break? When is it time to get outdoors and get some fresh air and go and walk the dog and gain some perspective?
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We are chatting with Dr. Janine Hubbard. She's a local psychologist. We're talking about how to mitigate our stress during these uncertain times with the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Claudette Barnes, filling in for Linda Swain. We'll be back in a moment.
Now back to Linda Swain on Target St. John's on VOCM.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Claudette Barnes, filling in for Linda Swain during On Target St. John's. Our guest on the phone happens to be Dr. Janine Hubbard, our local psychologist, and she's here to mitigate fears that may go hand in hand with COVID-19 pandemic, whether or not you're fear of the virus itself or perhaps you have economic worries. Dr. Hubbard, I know you wanted to get into some tips or some practical things you can do for those of us who may be stressed out for one reason or another due to the pandemic.
Sure. I think it is really important to remember that all of us are feeling, or almost all of us are feeling, at least some levels of increased stress, just kind of at a baseline level. And again, kind of checking in with your mental health, checking in to see how am I doing in terms of my self-care, my sleep, my eating, my drinking, all of those habits that are important to take a look at. If you are finding that you're feeling a little overwhelmed, There are some great techniques you can use. There are some wonderful apps. There are tons and tons of them out there. A couple that I like to mention to folks, the Anxiety Canada website. It's one of the most user-friendly, useful websites, and they have information there for adults, for kids, for teens. And they've produced something called Mind Shift, which is one of the apps that they offer that, again, just offers a whole lot of self-guided tools. Calm is another one that I really like a lot. It typically it does have a price attached to it, but it typically does a 30-day free trial, so that's kind of a nice place to start. And then again, it's also important to be teaching your kids some tools. First thing I suggest is ask them what they've learned at school. You would be amazed how many of the classes are teaching, whether it's some breathing exercises, whether it's some yoga exercises, a little bit of mindfulness. A couple of quick and easy ones that I use with kids all the time that I can teach over the phone here. One of them is just finding some bubbles. If you have just the bubbles that you blow outdoors normally, getting them, whether it's in the bathroom or, again, use this as an excuse to get some fresh air. Go outside on the porch or the deck and blow bubbles with long, slow, deep breaths. It's amazing how quickly that can break an anxiety reaction. Another one that I use a lot with kids, although, again, any of us can do it, it's a full body one. I want you to imagine your body as a piece of raw spaghetti. So make it as stiff and tighten up every single muscle in your body, and then show me what it looks like when you're cooked spaghetti. We do a similar one with a melting snowman. Imagine yourself as a frozen snowman, and then eventually you're going to melt each part of your body. And it's fun, and it's silly, and kids enjoy it, but it helps to regulate their breathing, and it helps with some deep muscle relaxation, which are all things that, quite frankly, we can use as part of our daily routine anyway.
I'm glad you said bubbles outside and not finger painting inside for parents who are stuck home.
I will sometimes, use the front porch or the bathroom, anywhere that hopefully you have some tiling. And for adults or teens, one of the easiest things you can do, and a lot of people are familiar with this, it's a basic mindfulness technique involving the five senses, and we kind of call it grounding with your five senses. So you take a minute, and again, it doesn't take more than about 2 minutes. I want you to think about what are 5 things you can see. Look around your environment. What are 4 things that you can feel? Maybe you're feeling wind blowing. Maybe you're feeling a sensation under your feet or with your hands. 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And that's designed as a grounding activity to kind of bring you back into the here and now. If you're finding that your worries and your anxieties are kind of spiraling out of control, it just helps to bring you back to where we're at the moment and help give a little bit of perspective.
And I guess that, as you mentioned, that would work for adults as well, seniors, people who are stuck home.
Yes, absolutely. I have lots of kids who use that one. And speaking of kids, my other favorite app for kids that, again, is free, Sesame Street, has produced a breathing and relaxation app that is like the best thing ever. And actually, I have a lot of teenagers who enjoy it because it's kind of fun and silly. So make use of some of the apps. Be mindful. There are all kinds of resources and techniques out there. It's just a question of figuring out which one works for you. So maybe the way I'm looking at a lot of this, especially the forced confinement, is let's use it for opportunity. Maybe now's the time to develop some of these skills or explore and find out what techniques work for you so that you can take them forward when all of this is over and you've equipped yourself with some new tools in your toolkit.
And hopefully we won't need it again if there's something else that comes beyond COVID-19.
No, but they're all useful techniques for everyday stress, which we're all going to experience. And that's really kind of the perspective that I'm trying to take on this, although, again, it's easy to get caught up in it, is this is going to alter life for a lot of us for probably the next few months. So looking in a perspective and saying, okay, I know what the stressors are, absolutely, and we know that there are a lot of stressors, but what are some of the opportunities that can perhaps come out of this? Is this a chance for me to develop some new hobbies and skills? Is this actually a chance for me to spend some more family time that we have lost track of between hockey practice and work and all the rest of it? Is it a chance to develop some self-discipline skills in terms of figuring out, how do I work from home? There are, I know, maybe it sounds a little overly optimistic, but it's a way of shifting your mind of thinking about it as opposed to focusing on the negative, thinking, okay, this is the situation, this is what I've been dealt with, how can I make the best of it? How are some ways that I can put a bit of a positive spin on it?
And that's a good place to go for a break. We are going to take a break right now. You're listening to On Target St. John's. I'm Claudette Barnes, filling in for Linda Swain, speaking with local psychologist Dr. Janine Hubbard. We're going to talk about something that's very good for you while you're home, and also gives you some sort of a sense of community. Dr. Hubbard will be chatting about that coming up right after the break.
Now back to Linda Swain on Target St. John's on VOCM.
And we're back at 1:53. I'm Claudette Barnes, filling in for Linda Swain this hour with local psychologist Dr. Janine Hubbard, talking about ways to mitigate our fears of COVID-19, at least help out with the anxiety. And Dr. Hubbard, you had so many great suggestions on how to deal with this when we're all stuck in it together at home. But you also wanted to chat quickly about, as well, the importance of helping community.
Absolutely. One of the ways that we know is a really effective strategy for coping with stress is to feel like we are doing good, is to feel like we are helping others, we are reaching out. It helps, again, to mitigate some of that feeling of helplessness, hopelessness. So there's a few things financially, and this is only if you have the means, only if this is something that's doable for you. Remember, we have an awful lot of very vulnerable citizens that have already been hit once by Snowmageddon, and that exact same group of people are about to be hit a second time. And so whether that's those with very difficult socioeconomic status, or some of our small businesses, our independent restaurants. So if you have the means, consider things like donation to food banks or your local community organizations. If you know you have a neighbor who's struggling and you're still somebody who's out and about and picking up some groceries, maybe picking up a couple of extra things and just dropping it on their doorstep. If you're someone who normally would support some of the local businesses, I know a number of them are doing things like takeout. Consider that as an option. Or, especially if you can do it online, purchase a gift certificate for future use. Same thing with our musicians. Go and pay to download their newest album. Go on their website and see if they've got some merchandise for sale. There are ways that we can really help to continue to support the people who are really going to be hardest hit by this.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because local is so important. And as you know, a lot of people had to get creative with their businesses, especially, as you mentioned, restaurant workers, for instance, using takeout. And then we have members of the gig economy trying to do concerts online instead of mass crowds, trying to keep ahead of the game.
And trying to help support them.
Yes.
The other one that we're going to see are, again, so many people are going to be struggling, and it doesn't all have to be financial. Keep in mind there are people around you who may be really struggling. So whether it's reaching out, and again, this is a project you can do with your kids, get them to write a card for one of the neighbors, help pick up, again, some extra groceries, or if you're cooking, sending over, a pot of stew. It's the reaching out and staying connected. If you know you have people who are socially isolated already, make sure you're checking in on them, whether that's by phone, whether that's, again, just kind of leaving a note on the door, just saying, hey, I'm thinking of you, reach out if you need me. Particularly anyone who is in kind of newly more vulnerable circumstances, somebody who's been divorced, somebody who's been widowed, somebody whose kids moved out earlier this year, who perhaps was already feeling socially isolated, now's the time to reach out. And also remember yourself. We saw this during Snowmageddon. Newfoundlanders are caring, helping people. We like to be looking out for our neighbors. Do not be shy about asking for help if you need it. Whether that's if you're online, there are some great resources available. Making sure you're doing things like calling the mental health crisis line, 709-737-4660. 668 or toll free 1-888-737-4668. Calling 811, which will help with mental health services. At least for now, Doorways are continuing to offer services. You need to call ahead for them. Or you can also look at things like visit the APNL website and look about finding a psychologist. As I said, many of us are trying to get very creative in terms of ways to provide support during this to all members of the community.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to mention about essential workers who are working through this, and then they come home. Do you have any advice for them on how to unwind and kind of turn it off when they're in the thick of things?
It is so hard, and I'm one of them. I'm out there working every day at the moment, and striking that balance. I'd say this is the time more than ever to work on some work-life balance. Actively say, you know what, I'm going to leave laundry till the weekend. I'm going to go and spend some time with my kids. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to get some fresh air and some exercise. As tempting as it is to come home and, pull out the chips and wine, maybe think about, your own self-care, and know that we're all looking out for ourselves. We're all looking out for each other. We're all trying to help out. And really and truly, we are going to get through this together. We're dealing with a new normal. There's no question. And change is hard for all of us. So reach out. See what you can do to help support your family, your friends, your social network. And keep tuning in, and hopefully we'll continue to provide advice.
Dr. Janine Hubbard, really appreciate you taking the time to be with us during this important time, COVID-19 pandemic, and giving us the tools that we need. I think it's going to be fun to blow some bubbles a little later on with children just to mitigate the stress. Thanks so much.
Oh, anytime. And the bubbles are good for adults, too. Just gonna as is the Sesame Street app. I'm just putting it out there.
All right, I'll do it in private for sure. You too. That's